Hello everyone, my name is Enrique and welcome to another review in which I talk about X-Men 97, episode 5, Remember It. Now, this episode, in my opinion, is probably the most impactful one out of all the episodes from this new X-Men show. So, a lot of people will probably want to know my thoughts in regards to this particular episode because it hits you like a ton of bricks, and probably even worse than that because if there is a theme in this episode is almost of death and destruction. And sometimes it's probably a little depressing to talk about, but that's one of my jobs. And it's important to realize that so we can all understand this situation. But don't feel too depressed of what I'm about to tell you. Just need to know that this, in my opinion, is one of the best episodes that we got so far. So I hope this doesn't create any misconceptions in regards to what I think of the episode. So let's talk about it. So the episode Remember It takes place, or the story takes place, in the island of Genosha. Now, if you're an X-Men fan, you know that Genosha is the island in which Magneto created a refugee or a refuge for a lot of mutants who felt that the world mistreated them. And if you've seen the X-Men, Wolverine and the X-Men, you know that that is the one place that Magneto can call home. So that is good to know. So Genosha, for the entire run of the original X-Men, was created more as a concentration camp and a booby trap for any mutant that comes there, basically being used as slaves for master mold. Then in a few seasons we don't see Genosha until we see Magneto already going there and restructuring it into be a sanctuary for all mutants. It was going to be the place where the mutants were going to make their last stand until the X-Men stop him. So fast forward to 1 year later and Magneto being part of the X-Men team and a lot of things happening in the government. Now Genosha became like a paradise the way it was supposed to be for a lot of mutants. Now, in between those episodes and seeing Genosha, we also see what is going on between the X-Men and their inner house. Now, if you remember from episode 3, Cyclops discovered that Jean was actually cloned, that the real one that she married to was actually in the hands of Mr. Sinister, that the one that she was having a baby with was actually a clone. And by the way, the clone of Jean Grey renamed herself Madeline Pryor. So yeah, there's your reference for you comic geeks. And she's in the island as well. She's also part of the committee that is part of the Genosha government. Now, I'm going to talk about it in a moment, but it's important to mention that both Cyclops and Jean Grey are in a very, very difficult place to talk about. Neither of them have spoken about what is going on because, let's face it, when you got cloned and your husband got a baby with your clone and that baby is in the future, what else can you say about it? And it creates a very difficult situation. Possibly something that we see in the comics. But nonetheless, it's part of the history, and Cyclops is trying to realize the situation, trying to come with terms with that, which is not easy, as well as coming to terms of what he feels about Madeline, because in essence, Cyclops loves Jean, but he also loves Madeline, which is Jean's clone. So, like I said, it makes a very complicated situation. And speaking of complicated situations, we also learn that Magneto and Rogue are basically starting to come to terms with their relationship because, as you know from the last few episodes, it was discovered that both Rogue and Magneto are having something intimate between the two of them, which leaves Gambit in a very awkward position and leaves him thinking, what the hell is he going to do in regards of the decision that Rogue makes. So that's one of the things that is unfortunately are going to be magnified in a very, very difficult way. But yeah, basically the show opens with the Gambit, Rogue, and just them as well as Magneto going to the island of Genosha. Now, in there, not only is Madeline in Genosha, but also Nightcrawler. And let me tell you, seeing Nightcrawler acting all playful, all advisory, like the kind of guy that I actually like. I never thought that I actually liked Nightcrawler until I saw this episode because while I saw the original run was a few skips of episodes, but nothing that significant that I would say, oh, I want to see more Nightcrawler. But in this show, they made me fall in love with the character. He is actually, in many respects, the voice of conscience for many, many people. But yeah, and as you recall, not only is Nightcrawler the son of Mystique, but also basically the stepbrother of Rogue as well. Keep in mind, both Rogue and Mystique are connected because Mystique adopted Rogue after she left home. And after a few events that happened, she wind up with the X-Men. But needless to say, she and Rogue discover who Nightcrawler is, and that they're both brothers. At the not in blood, but they stay close. And throughout the episode, we see a very, very colorful Genosha full of people enjoying life, marketing going anywhere, mutants dancing and partying, a lot of good things. We also see the Council of Genosha, which is comprised of Val Cooper, Magneto, and also, surprisingly enough, two members of the Hellfire Club, which are Sebastian Shaw and Emma Frost, as well as being comprised of Moira McTaggart and her husband Banshee. And probably a few more, but boy, this episode, it's packed with so many characters. I should also mention that the Morlocks are also part of the island of Genosha. They came to Genosha a few weeks after Magneto saved them from any of the Friends of Humanity. Needless to say, things are looking good in Genosha, and also very complicated for Rogue and Gambit, because as we discovered, apparently, and this is something that they never mentioned in the original X-Men show, but yeah, Rogue and Gambit, Rogue and Magneto had an affair even before she joined the X-Men, which I'm not gonna lie, I found very, very, very whiplashy. I thought for a moment that it was Rogue who, for a moment, thought that because she touched Magneto, that she could actually be able to feel some skin, and that's something I should probably explain. Because Magneto's magnetic powers, he can create some sort of a barrier between him and Rogue, in which it allows him to touch her without the need of, or without the worry of getting his powers absorbed. And things that happen with Rogue's powers. Basically, their powers are basically of a leech, and she's unable to control them, and thus she wears a ton of clothes in order to protect herself. But needless to say, it gets complicated. But yeah, Mystique send Rogue to Magneto. This is where we see Magneto in the Savage Land trying to create a life there. Rogue being part of it, having a relationship, but eventually it didn't pan out for some reason, and thus Rogue left. Now, keep in mind, Gambit doesn't know any of this, and learning about this makes things very, very heartbreaking for him because, well, all he ever wanted was to be with Rogue. Gambit can be a little a little bit of a Cajun liar, a guy who always cheats to win, or at the very least, he always makes snarky jokes and, makes snarky remarks in regards to any character. But one of the things that I like about Gambit is that he is also honest with himself and with his feelings towards Rogue. It's one of the reasons why many people consider them like a power couple. They actually care for one another and they actually feel things for each other without the need of touching each other or kissing. That's one of the relationships that I like the most. A relationship that is not based on physical contact but more of emotional contact. Regardless, learning about this news makes Gambit feel like he needs to split apart from Rogue. Rogue doesn't want to, but at the same time feels that she is having the opportunity to feel some feelings, some physical feelings towards Magneto, which is something that is going to be displayed in this episode. Regardless, we also cut two more scenes in the X Mansion. I should also mention that during during the scenes of the X Mansion between some of the X Men members, we see Trish Tilby. She's a reporter in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and more importantly, she's a very, very intimate person or an intimate friend of Beast, of Hank McCoy. So the relationship is starting to bloom in this episode, although it's going to get complicated from here on now. But yeah, basically more scenes of the interviews between Cyclops and Beast. We'll learn more about what is going on through the original Jean Grey's mind. She actually ends up kissing Wolverine, and I thought for a moment that Wolverine was going to just be happy about it. But to my utter shock, he tells Jean to just be with Cyclops. That yes, it's the rules as according to him, but it was more than that. And that brings me to an interesting point of view, and that's something that I don't know if the creators were keeping in mind while making this episode, but I think the moment that Wolverine got kissed by Jean Grey make him realize that he's not good for her. Keep in mind, Wolverine has lived for 200 and freaking years. That his words, not mine. But basically, for 200 years, he has lived, outlived everybody, have loved and lost, and realizing, despite all his jealousy towards Cyclops and his lust for Jean Grey, then when confronted with that moment, realizes, wow, I got what I want, and yet it's not exactly what I wanted. And that's the theme that I think we're going to see throughout the episode. But basically, he realizes, whether he likes it or not, that he, despite having feelings towards Jean Grey, despite being a hopeless romantic towards her, that he feels he's not good enough for her. And you know what? I hope they can maintain that. That say, okay, finally a kiss, but there is not much there. Or at the very least, he feels like that's not enough. Because that's all he ever wanted. But that's not exactly what he expected. Maybe that's my interpretation. I don't know. It's just that when it comes to this triangle romance between Cyclops, Jane, and Wolverine, I always get tired of it for many reasons. Particularly whenever they are giving more favors to Wolverine, or basically by making him more the protagonist more than Cyclops. The Cyclops gets screwed up in the end, or the Jean is just a price for Wolverine. And that's not the case. And I'm glad that they stuck to that. Or at the very least, they probably referenced that. That's one of my interpretations. But on the other side, we also see that Cyclops and Madeline are basically talking in their minds. They still have a psychic connection. Needless to say, they're still having feelings towards each other. It's not just for Nathan, but because of what they've been through together. That's something the Cyclops doesn't want because he doesn't want to betray Jean, but at the same time, he feels like Jean and Madeline are almost the same. And it all escalates pretty quickly, in my opinion. But regardless of that, we see that Cyclops. No, sorry. We see that Genosha at night, and we see everybody partying, making a celebration. I think I heard a song, and it was taking place back in the 90s. I cannot remember what it's called, but it was basically a party celebration for all mutants, and everyone was celebrating. And Nightcrawler jumping around. We see Rogan and Magneto dancing in the sky. A lot of things. I should also mention, I found it weird to see Emma Frost in Genosha, especially considering her history with the X-Men. And I mean, her and Sebastian Shaw. Remember, in the original episodes, they were trying to control Jean Grey and her powers, only to backfire. And in the end, they shrivel away until now. So seeing them be part of the Genosha community, it feels weird. But it's not that weird in my opinion. At the very least, it is going to make sense for what we are about to see later. But yeah, as the party is starting to go around, we see Madeline trying to keep her to maintain cool, only to get cyclically shocked alongside Jean Grey. They both suffer some sort of psychic shock in their heads, which inadvertently coincides with something that we are seeing. As the episode progresses, we see someone. In this case, Cable. Now, Cable, if you remember, is the one guy from the future who is basically part of a resistance that fights against Apocalypse and any other sort of threat that could threat the entire timeline, things like that. But it was basically going against Apocalypse. That was his mission, to stop Apocalypse. But yeah, basically he appears in this episode and he then tries to warn everybody to get out of the island, to leave the island, because an attack is getting imminent. And yeah, so as he started to warn people, Madeline notices him, and as he approaches Madeline, she realizes that Cable has her eyes, or at the very least, that he has Cyclops eyes, and it hits to her that yeah, that's his son Nathan Summers. Nathan Summers is Cable, and just as she realizes that, a time portal takes Cable away, saying the words "I'm sorry, mother," and then we see a flash of green light exploding of all Genosha. And this causes the entire island of Genosha being put into a blazing fire. Everywhere is death. People are dying, destruction overall. Nobody knows what the hell's going on, but we see a ton of people dying. In particular, we see a lot of the Morlocks. Leech, Callisto, and so many others getting killed. Banshee just got obliterated by a green laser alongside another mutant. We see Sebastian Shaw dead. We see Maura McTaggart dead. Can you imagine that? Maura had an episode focused on her when she found out that she had a son, or at the very least she was protecting her son, and now I'm thinking, oh my god, what? They just killed an important character in X-Men lore. That is shocking in itself, but more importantly, we see that the destruction that it was being caused is by none other but by a sentinel, but not just a sentinel, but by a wild sentinel. Now, for those who don't know, the wild sentinel is a main source of destruction in the comics. It was sent by another villain, which I'm not going to disclose who sent it because I don't want spoilers here. But needless to say, it caused a lot of destruction towards the mutant race, specifically in Genosha. In fact, the Wild Sentinel was actually attacking Genosha originally in the comics, and now they adapted it here, where we see the Wild Sentinel attacking Genosha, killing almost everybody, mutant and human alike. And it caused so much damage, so much destruction, that it forced a lot of people to go into refuge. So Magneto, Rogue, and Gambit taking it upon themselves to find a way to stop the Wild Sentinel. But it's proven to be very, very, very dangerous and very powerful. No one knows what to do on this subject until we get to one particular moment. Now we see Magneto trying to protect some mutants from the attack of the Wild Sentinel, but then he disappears in the attack. Rogue, in a fit of rage, tries to go after the Wild Sentinel, only for Gambit to stop her. And Gambit running towards the Wild Sentinel, trying to avoid that thing's attacks. He winds up getting stabbed or getting wounded by the Wild Sentinel. He gets stabbed in his one side, in which the Wild Sentinel approaches him saying mutant neutralize, only for Gambit to use his powers in order to fill the entire Wild Sentinel with his energy, with his mutant energy of exploding things. And he goes out not only as a badass, but uttering the words, "The name is Gambit, mon ami, remember it." The name of the episode, and it explodes. So yeah, basically the Wild Sentinel is destroyed, but with so many deaths. As Trish is reporting through her news journalist, everyone, the X-Men and the X-Mansion, seeing the destruction everywhere, everything, utter chaos, and we see Rogue hugging or cuddling Gambit, or not Gambit, but his body, because yeah, Gambit is dead, and Rogue is so heartbroken, unable to feel him. And she says it, she can feel him, and that is wow. That is powerful in a performance, and heartbreaking to see a character that we basically saw from the original X-Men show getting killed in such a gruesome and such a tragic way. It makes it more tragic when you realize that Rogue chose Gambit over Magneto, and she told him that she realizes that no matter what, even though she can feel someone, in this case Magneto, that it was not the same as loving Gambit. But it was too late to realize that. And now Gambit is gone, and now it causes an entire repercussion in the world that we see of the X-Men. So we're gonna have to wait and see what happens. Now, one of the things that I want to mention in this episode is that the word "remember it," clever line from this episode, I will say that. And it's not just a catchphrase from Gambit, but it's also a catchphrase from Cable. Because I remember, I watched the original X-Men show. That's one of the things that he used to say. That he used to say that to Apocalypse, saying, "The name's Cable, remember it, Apocalypse." That was one of his catchphrases, And yes, it is also Gambit's catchphrases as well. And but why am I bringing this up? Well, because you see, the original cast or the original voice actor of Cable is actually not doing another role in the show. He actually voices the Executioner. Meanwhile, the original voice of Gambit, Chris Potter, is actually voicing Cable in this show. So yeah, he got recasted, and we see technically we see Gambit referenced twice, both as in the new voiceover actor, which is AJ Locasio, and the original Gambit in the voice of Cable, Chris Potter. So I like that tongue-cheeky reference. It's something to mention, just for those who don't know. Basically, Gambit was there in two different places at once. But yeah, that was the case. I should also mention, there were a ton of mutants that were killed in this episode, and by God, it's a ton. They don't shy away from the destruction of everything, from Genosha, seeing everything as a hell-hide place, seeing everybody just running for their lives. A lot of mutants, ones that we saw from the original show, being killed in such gruesome and very tragic ways. Not to mention that a lot of characters that we see in this show are basically gone. And who knows if they're going to come back, or at the very least make a reference of that. Needless to say, we see a lot of death and destruction. And also, as an interesting fact, and well, more like as an information that I didn't know until I saw someone talking about it. The voice actress who plays Rogue, Lenore Zen. Well, if you feel like the performance felt very very real for us, especially when we're watching, is because in many respects it was real, and it was feeling real because at the time they were recording the episode, we Lenore was hit with the tragic news that one of her nieces died from cancer. That's gotta be something very hard to talk about, or to even display it in an episode. Now, we are seeing examples in some places. If I ever get to talk about The Last of Us Part 2, first I have to do Part 1, but if I do Part 2, then I'm going to talk about it because one of the actresses from that show also suffered a major loss, and that's something that we need to talk about it. But yeah, it was basically that Leonore suffered a tragic loss in her family, and thus she put her work and decided to use that pain to guide Rogue to this episode. And it makes sense in many respects. It's hard to talk about it, but it makes sense because she's a woman who lost everything, including the man that she loved, and all due to this horrific tragedy. So yeah, things are getting tragic for Rogue, and now we are going to wait and see how does she react, or how does she act upon it. When you're in grief, what kind of woman do you turn out to be? Well, that's something that we're going to find out later. But yeah, not much to talk about, but this episode hit hard. It was basically seeing the worst fears of the mutant race being realized by watching a cold, wild machine obliterating almost everything. Basically, the majority of the mutant population was in Genosha, and the majority of them died. And we have to say, what happens with the survivors? How would they react? How would the entire world react? how would the X-Men will be, or how would they handle this situation, especially considering how much they fought to bring back the mutant race from the prejudice that they it was once were, especially in Genosha, since it had a lot of things going around, and after trying to make it into a paradise for mutants, after this, what happens? How would they react? And how would they act upon it? So that's some of the questions that are leaving us here. But we are going to see what happens later in the episode. But other than that, really great episode. Excellent performances for the majority of the actors. A lot of great visuals from the animators. It was definitely great to see, and hopefully we see that type of quality continue up on the next episodes. But that was it. That was my review. What do you guys think? Do you love it? Hate it? Let me know in the comments section below. And don't forget to subscribe and give a like. The more likes I get and the more subscribers I get, the more I have the chances to increase my show. But other than that, I hope you enjoy this episode. I'm Enrique, and I'll see you next time. Peace.